Is Central Park actually a product of nature? You know, when you walk through those 843 acres of pristine trees, rolling grass, and sparkling water right in the middle of Manhattan, it really feels like it's just existed since time immemorial, right? Like it's some untouched wilderness the city just happened to build around. But what if I told you that almost every single inch of it is an artificial, meticulously engineered illusion?
Welcome to this explainer. Today, I want to take you on a bit of a lecture-style journey into the true, highly engineered history of America's greatest urban park. We're going to look at the blueprints of this massive illusion, examine the staggering physical challenges of actually building it, and uncover the deeply buried human and ecological stories lying right there beneath the soil.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our syllabus for today. First, city growth and water needs. Then, engineering the natural illusion. Third, the displacement of Seneca Village. Next, preservation versus recreation. And finally, the ecology of the urban forest. Let's get started.
Section 1. City growth and water needs. Transforming a swamp into a public utility.
So, picture this. It's the mid-19th century, and New York City is experiencing a massive, unprecedented population boom. Immigrants are flooding into Manhattan, and the city desperately needs open green space just to escape the intensely crowded conditions. But the land they chose? It was definitely not a pristine forest. The park's first engineer, a guy named Egbert Veely, actually described the original site as a pestilential spot, where rank vegetation and miasmatic odors taint every breath of air. Yikes. The terrain was incredibly rocky and essentially a giant swamp, so it was a massive physical challenge right out of the gate just to make the land usable. Now, on top of the need for space, the city's freshwater supply was dwindling fast, and the solution required a staggering capacity, 1 billion gallons. That is literally a billion gallons of water. That was the capacity of the newly constructed Central Park Reservoir, which was built right smack in the middle of the park, between 86th and 96th Streets, largely to combat deadly cholera outbreaks. And we actually have the records to prove how insane this undertaking was. Historical contractor photographs and records from Fairchild Walker & Co. really show the jaw-dropping scale of this project. Built entirely by hand between 1858 and 1862, this 106-acre reservoir was 40 feet deep. It wasn't just a pretty scenic lake, It was a highly functional, absolutely critical part of the city's freshwater system, taking in water from the Croton Aqueduct and distributing it all throughout Manhattan. Moving right along to Section 2, engineering the natural illusion, building the Greensward Plan. So how exactly did architects Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux take this swampy, rocky terrain that housed a massive industrial reservoir and turn it into a peaceful oasis? Well, this brilliantly illustrates their vision. What you're seeing isn't raw nature. It's a meticulously planned simulation designed to completely conceal any human intervention. Literally every water body, from the vast lakes to the tiny ponds, is man-made. Olmsted and Vaux were aiming for a democratic space, a real reprieve for all classes of New Yorkers that felt entirely naturally rural. To pull off this organic, natural appearance, workers had to perform an unbelievable amount of physical labor. They moved nearly 5 million cubic yards of stone, earth, and topsoil. 5 million. And remember, this was almost entirely by hand between 1858 and 1873. Just backbreaking work. The execution of this master plan required some really intricate engineering steps. First up, they had to drain those pestilential swamps using a super complex system of underground pipes. Second, to support the 500,000 trees and shrubs they wanted to plant, they actually had to haul in literal tons of topsoil from upstate New York and New Jersey. And finally, and honestly, this was their masterstroke. They built sunken transverse roads. By hiding the busy east-west city traffic below the actual grade of the park, they preserve those beautiful, continuous, uninterrupted views of nature. Section 3. Displacement of Seneca Village. The human toll of a democratic park. We have to acknowledge that this so-called democratic park came with a profound human cost. Before the park was ever built, this land wasn't just an empty expanse or a shantytown, as some claimed. Seneca Village was a highly established working and middle-class community. It was founded in 1825 by free African Americans and later became home to Irish and German immigrants.
As you can see, this diverse community was incredibly robust. They had 3 churches, 2 schools, and 3 cemeteries. It was a real thriving neighborhood.
Let's look at the timeline here. After its founding in 1825, the village thrived for decades. But then, by 1853, the city started its parkland assessments. Despite the 1855 census officially identifying 225 residents living in Seneca Village, the city government ultimately used eminent domain to acquire the land. By 1857, all those residents were forcibly evicted, and their homes, their churches, and their schools were completely razed to the ground. So the really crucial takeaway here is that Central Park literally sits on top of displaced communities. Thankfully, comprehensive historical studies and archaeological digs over the past few decades, like those chronicled in books by historians such as Sarah Cedar Miller, have been absolutely vital. They're bringing these buried truths back to light and making sure the diverse New Yorkers who originally owned and lived on this land are not forgotten.
All right, Section 4, Preservation versus Recreation, the ideological battle for the park. You see, once the park was actually built, a massive ideological battle kicked off over how the public should use it. On one hand, you had Olmsted and Box's original vision, the pastoral and picturesque. They really wanted a space for quiet, rural repose and naturalistic vistas. But on the other hand, especially as we jump ahead to the 20th century under Parks Commissioner Robert Moses, there was a huge push for active recreation. Moses brought in federal funding to build 19 playgrounds, ball fields, and Woolman Rink. This fundamentally shifted the park's identity from a place of quiet contemplation to an active, paved public utility. And here's the catch with artificial nature: it requires constant human upkeep. Without it, the whole thing falls apart. And the park has gone through some pretty severe cycles of decline and renewal. By the early 1900s, it was suffering from major neglect. Moses revived it in 1934. But after his era, the 1960s, saw the beautiful meadows turn into literal dust bowls with crumbling infrastructure. It actually wasn't until the Central Park Conservancy was created in 1980 that a steady stream of private and public funding finally stabilized this massively engineered landscape. Which brings us to Section 5, Ecology of the Urban Forest, tracking 160 years of arboreal change. So what exactly happens to an artificially planted forest over 160 years? Well, Olmsted's original 1858 plan intended for an overwhelming 92.3% of the park's plants to be native species. But over time, especially during that Robert Moses era we just talked about, there was a massive influx of alien species. Moses set up these nurseries that just mass-produced a few specific types of trees, like the Norway maple and European linden. This drastically shifted the whole ecological makeup far away from Olmsted's original diverse native design. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that you might assume a city park naturally loses trees over time. But surprisingly, between 1934 and 1982, tree density in Central Park actually increased by over 50%. As it turns out, those wide-open meadows Olmsted designed ended up providing the perfect growing space for new trees to naturally expand. That said, survival in an urban forest definitely isn't easy, but the reasons why might surprise you. Long-term ecological studies show that urban heat, along with ozone and sulfur dioxide air pollution, actually don't cause major tree species losses in the park. So what does? Well, the absolute biggest threat to the survival of the forest is us, human foot traffic. Intense trampling by visitors severely harms the smallest diameter trees, essentially destroying the saplings that are desperately needed to replace the older canopy when it eventually dies. So what does this all mean? What does Central Park's engineered and highly contentious history really reveal about what public space means in a democratic society? As we've seen, this natural oasis is actually an incredible triumph of human engineering, built out of swamps and dirt hauled entirely by hand. But we've also seen that its creation required the tragic, forceful displacement of diverse, established communities like Seneca Village. We've learned that maintaining this illusion requires endless funding, and ironically, that we, the public, are both the park's greatest beneficiaries and its single biggest ecological threat. Central Park isn't just a place to throw a frisbee or relax. It is a 160-year-old living, breathing lesson in the complexities of urban life. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope you never look at a walk in the park the same way again.